if you look at the physical structure of DNA, the actual DNA that's in your cells, there's these caps on the end called telomeres, and they are designed to protect DNA from damage. Think of them as bumpers, shock absorbers. They're designed, when you look at their physical structure, to last 120 years. So we know that our DNA is meant to last 120 years, which means we are meant to last 120 years.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to dive into a topic that I think is very important. There's been a lot of buzz about it recently. This man I actually met about 5 years ago or so, and he actually first turned me on to getting my DNA tested and what insights and what I could learn from getting my DNA tested. And I actually did so through a company that he founded called The DNA Company. So today we have Kashif Khan. He is the best-selling author of The DNA Way. He's a celebrity longevity coach, founder of The DNA Company, and 2 times TEDx speaker. He is a pioneer in driving the functional approach to genomic interpretation, overlaying environment, nutrition, and lifestyle on the genetic blueprint to create personalized longevity plans. Growing up in Vancouver, Canada, as an immigrant, in an immigrant household, he developed an industrious entrepreneurial spirit from a young age, and he is a co-founder of the DNA Company, which is a leading company in DNA/genomic testing. And I'm really excited. Kashif, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Great to be here, man.
Yeah. So I remember when we met 5 years ago and you told me about the DNA Company and the test, and I got it done after, and actually had it was really great. I think I don't know if I even paid extra or not, but I got a consultation with one of your coaches, and it really provided a lot of insight, a lot of insights, and a lot of different supplements. I started taking actually after that, based on my DNA. But so I'm sure our listeners are really excited to learn. Let's give a little bit of a background. How did you get interested in this and eventually start founding the company?
So I was like you. I didn't come from the space, and I was curious, but it was driven by a need because I was really sick. So I actually came from a completely different industry. I had a PR company that helps startups grow. So Toronto, where I live, has a big tech startup culture, kind of Silicon Valley North, you could call it. And so my business used to help these tech startups develop and grow their companies. And that's what I did. And then I got really, really sick. I had horrible eczema, psoriasis, gut issues, migraines, mental health, let's say depression, like I didn't want to go to work on some days. So all of this stuff for me was being treated as different problems, different medication, different doctors. First time I had ever needed a doctor for anything. And then all of it all at once. And that was the first time that I learned that when you ask the question, why did this happen to me? 38 years, didn't have any of these things. Now all of a sudden they're all happening all at once. I must have done something wrong. I realized that they don't answer that question, that's not their job. Their job is, here's what it's called, and here's what pill you're supposed to take. And 5 different things have 5 different names with 5 different pills, right? Yeah. So that's what motivated me to discover biology and my own human body, and through traditional Chinese medicine, through naturopathy, through homeopathy. I just kept learning and learning and learning and healed myself. And there was a couple of major aha moments, starting with a couple of key genes that I was missing that really opened my eyes to why I was actually sick. And from there, and the story goes, I literally quit what I was doing, self-funded the research, and built a business out of it because it was so purposeful for me.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I'm curious now, what were those genes? And let's start with that.
So a big one was my neurochemical pathway. So the way I process perspective, emotions, trauma, all of these things, I'm wired for what we call warrior genetics, meaning I can take a lot of pain mentally and physically, and I overdo that and burn myself out. So what I was doing, dopamine is a chemical that allows you to experience pleasure, eat some food, have fun with your friends. That's a dopamine hit. It's also a reward. Achieve something at work. That's also a dopamine hit. Both of those require the DRD2 gene to activate a receptor in your brain to bind that dopamine to actually allow you to feel the intensity of that pleasure or reward. After you're done, COMT needs to be deployed, a protein by another gene, to break that dopamine down and get rid of it, to bring you back to your default baseline, right? So the way that I do that is I have the very slim to none, let's say, dopamine receptor. So it's very hard for me to feel the intensity. And I have an ultra rapid COMT, so it doesn't last long enough. And so I'm in this pleasure and reward seeking moment for far too short at far too low of intensity. And it ends up feeling like I can't get no satisfaction, right? So that leads to three potential outcomes: depression, which I felt, addiction, which I've been through, or achievement, because it not only powers pleasure, but it also powers reward. And your brain doesn't need both, it only needs one. And because of this insatiable need to like more, whatever I did yesterday isn't enough because I can't get satisfied, I was pushing my body far too hard. And where my brain could take it, my body couldn't. And I burnt myself out. That was a big one for me. The other big one, so I learned how to structure things. I learned what reality actually is and how I'm supposed to behave and what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. How to deal with other people who I was constantly disappointed by and what actually is a reasonable outcome, things of that nature, and certain supplements that would help me upregulate. Suppose I needed to go on a vacation with the family and I just needed to feel a bit zen. I know I can take L-theanine or I can take GABA and balance my dopamine levels. A little bit of a cold exposure, even washing my face with ice water would give me that dopamine hit. So I know I've now learned how to balance things off so it's there when I need and it's not when I don't. The other big one I would say to answer your question was around my gut. And you're hearing everywhere, Dr. Gundry's book just came out, Gut Check, where he said that out of all his cardiac patients, not a single one doesn't have a gut issue. It's so highly connected to chronic disease because of leaky gut and inflammation. And so when I look at my gut, there's a gene called GST-M1, which is a primary first line defense to bind and remove toxins that are coming along with your food. So plastics, chemicals, packaging, pesticides, all of it. I don't have the gene. So it's not even what version, how well, what variation, mutation. I don't have it. It's missing from my human instruction manual. So this entire job just doesn't happen. And that, taking it a step back, a gene is an instruction that tells your cells how to do their jobs. Simple terms, that's what it is. And if you don't have the instruction, you're not doing the job. And so when we were going out, me and my business partner going out for lunches every day in the city downtown, entertaining clients, I felt horrible. He felt fine. Because whereas I don't have this gene, he actually has an extra copy of it. So he's a superhuman gut detoxer. And I really believed I had a problem because we had the same habits, different outcome. And so I then learned that there were certain things that for him were a problem and for me weren't. Right. So though I can keep going on and on and on and just talk straight all about this, but those are two big ones. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. And it actually, because I always wonder, like, how do some people drink so much and still be able to function? And if I have, 2 glasses of wine, I can't go to the gym the next day. I feel like crap. I mean, it's just, I can't do it at all. And and so it makes sense that some people have this extra gene potentially, or at least have a gene of it, and some people don't. Interesting.
Yeah. And even recovery, what you just talked about. So mitochondrial function and your ability to deal with imbalance, oxidative stress, lack of homeostasis. So your body is always seeking something in the middle. It wants balance, whether it's food, sleep, everything. It prefers balance. And so when you're out of balance, overloading the alcohol or perhaps sleeping too late, there's a lot of sugar in wine, for example, all of these imbalances, your mitochondria needs to deal with the oxidation. So your mitochondria, for those of you that don't know, it's this energy production center in the cell. Every one of your cells has it. There's a constant intake of oxygen and the nutrition from your food being combined at the mitochondria to create energy. And the outcome of that is an oxidant. So the oxygen that gives you life slowly kills you because you can't take oxygen and use it for energy without making an oxidant, which is toxic in nature, right? Now, genetically, some people, doesn't matter. They do a really good job of the superoxide dismutase pathway eliminating that oxygen from the cell. They do a really good job at driving glutathione activity once it's out into the bloodstream, sending it to the liver to pee it out, sweat it out. Some people don't do these things so well. And so when you put yourself through oxidative stress, running on a treadmill, not sleeping enough, overeating, undereating, drinking too much alcohol, the next day you're fried because your body is lagging in the recovery process. And so the thing may not be don't drink, it may be, although that's a good idea, it may be support your mitochondria because that's why you didn't recover.
You said what's your mitochondria?
Support
Your
meaning,
mitochondria. Okay, yeah. Because I do remember now. It's coming back to me a lot of it. Was they did tell me also I had an issue with with detoxing, and they highly recommended I do sauna as much as possible after I took the DNA test, right? And so there were certain supplements I think there as well. But what are other ways that you can support your mitochondria?
So there's supplements, and then there's activity. So the mitochondria doesn't like oxidative stress, but it loves hormetic stress, healthy stressors, holding your breath, lifting heavy weights, hot and cold dysregulation, temperature dysregulation. So stressors that signal to your body, let's get into warrior mode, time to fight, right? It up regulates adrenaline, testosterone, and mitochondrial function. Imbalances, oxidation, which actually burden the cell, down regulate and put a weight and burden on the mitochondria that it can't handle. Then there's supplementation. There's things like ubiquinol. I think everyone's heard of CoQ10. There's a very specific form of CoQ10 that comes from a company called Kaneka in Japan that's called ubiquinol. Very potent version. If you combine that with something called PQQ, really good for the mitochondria. Yeah. There's a really unique form of vitamin E called a tocotrienol. So there's a lot of tocopherols. These are your typical vitamin E, but tocotrienol, which comes from the palm fruit, really upregulates mitochondrial function. In fact, Dale Bredesen, in his book about reversing Alzheimer's, he talks about using tocotrienols to reverse Alzheimer's and improve cognitive function. Why does it work? Because your brain, after your heart, has the second highest density of mitochondria in your body. So it's not that the tocotrienols were reversing Alzheimer's, they were giving the mitochondria energy to be resilient, thrive, make new neurons, make neural pathways, fight the inflammation. It's a bit of an energy equation. So he saw it as cognitive improvement went up, but here's the reason why. And here's why it worked more in some people than other people because of their genetics.
Yeah, that's really good. That makes a lot of sense. As well. And speaking of Alzheimer's, it is one that I wanted to ask you about on this interview as well, because I know that there is a gene that if you have that gene, you are much, much more likely to get Alzheimer's. And I think that's important for people to know because then they can take actions, right? There are books that I've read. I think probably the one you just referenced, The End of Alzheimer's Playbook, and different strategies you can learn, supplements you could take that if you have this gene, you can really prioritize that, right? So can you talk a little bit about that gene?
So what you're describing is a perfect example to explain the difference between genetics and functional genomics. Genetics is what we thought the potential was, but there's so much more that we can do. Functional genomics. Just like medicine is diagnose and prescribe, and functional medicine is why did you get sick? Root cause. Right? So same thing, genetics is the APOE gene. If you have a 3-3, low risk of Alzheimer's. If you have a 3-4, 8 to 10 times elevated risk of dementia. If you have a 4-4, 17 to 25 times elevated risk of dementia. But not everyone gets it. Right. Functional genomics is why? Why does this happen? And if I know the why, I know exactly what to do. So I don't see the genetic answer of this gene increases Alzheimer's risk. I see it as this prioritizes you taking action against Alzheimer's, and there's absolutely no reason it should happen if you take the action. So let me explain why. APOE, if you actually ask what does it do, it's responsible for lipid transport, the movement of cholesterol in your body. So we know that LDL is sent, HDL then carries it back to the liver to eliminate it. There's this LDL, HDL cycle. That's how cholesterol moves around your body in simple terms, right? ApoE directs that process. How do you move cholesterol? So if you're inefficient, 3,4 or 4,4, it's much easier for some of that cholesterol to get left behind and to build a plaque, or for you to have higher cholesterol levels in your blood. Your baseline just may be a higher level. That still doesn't answer the question of why does it cause Alzheimer's, right? And this is where science kind of ends. ApoE causes Alzheimer's. So when you develop amyloid plaque in your brain, so cholesterol buildup in your brain, plaque, that starts to cause brain cell death and eventually cognitive decline. And then, yes, it is a first step. Why was cholesterol in your brain? Why the plaque? Why did ApoE matter? Your body uses cholesterol to fight inflammation. So if you have inflammation anywhere, it will deploy cholesterol there as a hormone that smooths things out, deals with all the abrasions, deals with picture like a Vaseline, just making things smooth. That's what it does, right? So if you have a bad version of this gene, cholesterol is sent, hormones are active, inflammation is fought, but some gets left behind. Bad ApoE gene, plaque buildup, dementia. The real question is, why did I have inflammation in my brain? And I can talk about 5 big whys. One is me. I had zero gut detox, which means the foods I eat are much likely to cause gut wall dysbiosis, which means leaky gut, which means leaky brain, which means brain inflammation. For some people, it's inhalation. There's genes around when you breathe stuff in, pesticides, chemicals, mold, off-gassing from your furniture, the new car smell, all of these things. How efficiently do you filter and prevent that nonsense from entering the bloodstream? Some people don't do that so well genetically. So that may be their why. Breathe it in, causes brain inflammation. For some people, it's metabolic. It's what they eat causes I know if I have your DNA, how you handle starches, what your insulin response looks like. Should you be a vegan or not? Should you be carnivore or not? Your genes don't lie, right? So if you're doing these things incorrectly because you just didn't know any better, that may cause metabolic dysfunction, which leads to brain inflammation and cognitive decline. Number 4 is stress. The silent killer in the background, which we're all dealing with, especially if it's trauma related and you're stuck in a fight or flight where the body doesn't even want to heal. And then all of a sudden, this constant drip of cortisol is causing inflammation. The last one, hormones. Some of our hormone metabolites are toxic in nature, and they can cause brain inflammation, especially true for women, which is why 80% of dementia cases are in women because of toxic estrogen metabolites, right? So these are the things.
Wow.
So if you see a genetic direction, you have a risk of breast cancer, you have a risk of Alzheimer's, you have a risk of whatever, get rid of the word risk. And instead of saying that, it's like, I need to prioritize this. Now let me go look at these buckets of inflammation and see which piece is broken in my genome and action it. The disease can't happen without inflammation. It's really that simple.
I absolutely love what you just said. I think it's so important to shine a light on what you just said, because I actually was afraid of some of these tests sometimes because I know how powerful the placebo effect is. And you don't want someone to actually say, oh, I have the Alzheimer's gene. Oh, I'm just going to get Alzheimer. I'm going to, and if they're thinking that in their head over and over and not taking any action, right? So the distinction that you made is like your genes, just because you have certain genes or don't have certain genes, it doesn't mean that is your destiny. It just means you need to do something differently or address it specifically in a certain way. And that's why it's important to know this information. It's better to know this information and take action on it, right? Now, again, so you want to, I was afraid of a lot of these types of tests because I always was like, wow, the placebo effect is so powerful. But the way you described it is that, again, it's not your destiny. And this is the whole field right now that's becoming more and more popular called epigenetics, right? In that you can, your genes are not your destiny. You can change the way that your genes express themselves, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. The number one concern that we get for someone considering, should I do this or not, is I don't want to know if I'm getting Alzheimer's. That's still the number one, right? And I actually agree with that. I think to tell somebody that you have an 80% risk of dementia that's going to cause the dementia. The anxiety
Right.
and stress alone of someone living with that, right? That's enough to get them there. And there are, by the way, placebo genes. I've worked on clinical studies and research, and I know that there's certain striding of populations and filtering based on genes that cause people to have deeper belief. Keep in mind, your brain doesn't know what's going on. The thoughts you experience are conscious, and those thoughts are telling your brain what the reality is, and then your brain then drives biochemistry based on what you just told it. It actually has no clue what's happening. And so that suggestion for some people can be filtered, and for some people literally becomes a belief, and it turns certain processes on. And I've seen this, let's say, corruption in clinical studies where these people are intentionally included because the pharma company knows that it's going to pass because they're suggestible.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's why they started doing, placebo controlled trials, because they realized back in the day, if they didn't do a placebo control, then they just gave everyone the drug and said, hey, this drug helps you with XYZ. Just the placebo effect alone was going to have them pass. So that's why they actually do placebo trials where it's tested against a placebo and has to show that, right?
Yep. So that evidence-based model, as they call it, was actually created not far from where I live, in Hamilton, a suburb of Toronto. It's been so now we've gotten to the point where you have this evidence-based model, which you have the placebo, you have this comparison of data, which pushed us into one size fits all. That model leads us to here is a works on 7 out of 10 people answer, and hopefully it works on you. And when I say it worked on 7 out of 10, it worked really well on 4. It kind of worked okay on 3, and it didn't work on 3, but maybe even made them feel worse. So how is that something that is meant to be passed? And if you take the best depression drug we have right now, the literal best, it works 40% of the time.
Wow.
Right? 40%, and it somehow got approved. Why? Because genetically we're not all the same. And
Right.
whoever it worked on in the trial, maybe it was aligned for them. And let me give you a simple example there. There's some people, I did some work with the Navy SEALs, and we were trying to determine why do some of these soldiers come back with PTSD and some have no problem and go back for a second and third mission, no issues, right? And so we know that during that moment, that impactful stimulus, that it's an adrenaline rush. And so I looked at the genetics of adrenaline. And what did I find? ADRA2B, ADRA2B determines the efficiency of that adrenaline experience. And some people experience it, they're aware, and they move on. Some people experience it and they bind an imprint in their memory, the feeling, the emotion, because their adrenaline response genetically doesn't work so well. And when I say it doesn't work so well, this is actually a survival trait of our ancestors that I will hold the grudge, I will remember the pain, they will never hurt me again. So it actually works really well. Clinically and academically, it's the bad version of the gene, but in practical terms, it's actually the advanced version of the gene that allows you to hold trauma and remember and not make the same mistake twice, right? Survival mechanism. But in today's reality, where everything is trauma inducing, this is where you might see somebody who is depressed or risk adverse or won't show up, or doesn't want to talk to you again, can't go to the doctor. Every time they see an email with the doctor's name, they don't want to open it, procrastinating, because it brings back the feeling as if it's a continuation of last time. And this is what we found in some of these soldiers. The second thing we found, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This gene drives neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to build new neural pathways, and which speaks to learning new skills. How much do things mean when there's new input? How much weight do you give it? And if you have the not so good version of this, you don't do a good job with neuroplasticity. You don't make new neural pathways that efficiently. And so not only may you be experiencing the trauma, I feel the feeling as if it's a continuation, but it also may be a shell shock. My brain is struggling to process because I lag in making new neurons. And so it's a bit of this means a lot. There's a lot of burden. Now put those two things together. How is that soldier meant to go to active deployment and come back okay? Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And in as much as picture that person as a scientist or clinician, it may be an incredible superpower. Give
Right.
that person negative stimulus trauma, it is a burden. So in as much as a burden, it can also be a superpower if you knew what you were wired for.
Very interesting. Very interesting. What about, does the DNA test show anything regarding methylation and that kind of stuff? I
Yeah,
know
so
that's a hot
methylation,
topic. Yeah.
it is. I mean, Gary Brecker's done a good job putting that out there. And
Yeah.
all I would
Now
say
everyone's
is,
asking me, hey, have you had a methylation test? And I'm like, I think I had it when I did the DNA test, but I wasn't sure.
yeah, so methylation is one of many systems you need to understand. It's not the only system. And if you only look at one system, it's kind of like saying, hey, have you tested your exhaust system in your car? Yeah,
Mm,
it's great. But what about everything else, right?
yeah.
Like when you look at a service schedule, everything needs to be serviced from transmission to oil to all of it, filters, etc. So methylation is a major system. It's converting certain nutrients into the bioavailable form. It's sending a methyl group to a non-water soluble toxin and making it water soluble so that you can actually get rid of it. It is gene expression. So how efficiently does your body respond to new inputs? So all of these things combined are methylation, and they're driven by key micronutrients from the B complex, right? Um, so we look at it, but we look at it more functionally because it's not standalone. Just like go look at my heart, go look at my Alzheimer's, go look at my hormones. If you look at one of those things independently, you're not really going to solve the problem. You're going to mask a symptom.
Mm,
Same thing with only looking at methylation without looking at the detox that is directly attached. It's like baton pass. This job happens, then the next job happens. There might be a funnel a bottleneck, right? If one
mm.
of them isn't working properly. So all I'm saying is that you cannot be certain without looking at genes in the context of the biology that's actually going on.
Yeah.
There's a cascade, there's steps, there's systems. They're not single genes doing single things. It's more of a symphony, all working together.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I think your test is a full-on test, testing, looking at all the genes, or as many as as many as you guys can. Versus, I've seen some test marketing. It's like, oh, see if you have this one gene, right? Well, it's like, okay, you might see you have this one gene, or you don't have this one gene, but if you're not looking at it together with the bigger picture, you might be taking the wrong actions, right?
Yeah, and in as much as we're looking at more, we're also looking at far less than the industry standard. So if you take just a methylation test at 6 or 7 genes, that is not enough information,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you look at the human genome, it's 22,000 genes. And so 22,000 genes, most of which is noise that you don't need to know about. There's about 90 or so that we look at to cover these core systems. So if I tell you what those core systems are, there is everything about your brain, neurochemistry, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you behave? How do you perceive? How does the world perceive you? There's everything about sleep. I can't fall asleep. I can't stay asleep. These are all different problems. Everything about metabolism and diet. How do you metabolize starches, fats, carbs, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, like all these key micronutrients that keep you functioning. Then aging and cellular health. So what's going on at the cellular level from inflammation to detoxification to removal of mold to how do you deal with toxins? How do you deal with chemicals? How do you deal with sunscreen you put on your skin? What's causing the inflammation, which then leads you to chronic disease and from cardiovascular disease to dementia to diabetes, cancers, etc., which is connected directly to cellular health. And the last bit is hormones. So hormones is the one area that I would say that most genetic tests don't look at because genetics is, again, what I said before. This gene means this gene means this gene means this. Hormones is the one area where you just can't do that. Unless you look at the whole cascade, which is women have a monthly cycle, men have a daily cycle. It's the exact same cycle, just different timeline. Progesterone converts to testosterone, converts to estrogen. Men and women do the same thing in a different timeline. But within that, there's different variable. I make too much of this, too little of that. I make a toxic version of this. I make a healthy version of this. I don't detox this one properly. There's so many variables, and you have to look at the whole map. It's like a big chart, right? Then you can make a call. And this is why most genetic companies don't bother. It's too complicated. So we've made that complexity very simple because we spent 3 years with 7,000 patients, actually sitting in front of them with their DNA in our hand, analyzing them and helping them with their problems. And that's what was missing. Academics, they knew what the genes mean. Medicine knew what disease was. These two never came together. So we did it. We spent 3 years with 7,000 people to actually understand, okay, there's some number of billions of women on this, billions of women on the planet. Are there billions of profiles? Or what did we come to a conclusion? There's actually 6. So now I can take this highly complicated mess of hormones and know that you fall into one of 6 buckets. So it makes it much easier for me to identify problems and also solve the problem. So, but that took 3 years and 7,000 people to figure out. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
And so it's always obviously important for people to get their blood tested at least every 6 months or something like that. With DNA testing, is it something you only need to do one time and then you really don't have to do it again because it's not changing?
Yeah, your genes don't change. And so one test is all you need. The only thing I would say is there may be, so for example, we were talking about this earlier, the time that you worked with us, we were testing for less. Now we're testing for more. So we may have to retest for new genes we just weren't testing for, but there's no new genes to discover and your genes aren't going to change.
Right.
So once you've been given an outcome, that's it. That's you for life. Right? So the likelihood of you needing to retest maybe once more in a few years if we come up with some magical information about something that we just didn't know was going to happen, right? Which is unlikely, but possibly. Otherwise, the things you tested for are permanent.
Got it. Great. Yeah. I mean, so that's good to know. I mean, you only have to do it one time, essentially, right? Or at least once every 10 years or something. It's very, very, very effective and doesn't cost much. So really kind of a no-brainer to use that in conjunction with your normal blood tests as well.
Yeah, and blood tests are kind of like a marker in time. Here's where I'm at today.
Yep.
DNA is kind of like, why? How did I get there? Because how did you get there? You were not born with bad blood markers. You were born seemingly healthy. We would expect that you're born okay. Now, you did something, environment, nutrition, lifestyle. It's one of these epigenetic factors. You did something to actually extend your life or shorten your life. And I say this because if you look at the physical structure of DNA, the actual DNA that's in your cells, there's these caps on the end called telomeres, and they are designed to protect DNA from damage. Think of them as bumpers, shock absorbers. They're designed, when you look at their physical structure, to last 120 years. So we know that our DNA is meant to last 120 years, which means we are meant to last 120 years. Right?
Nice.
And so the average American life expectancy for women is 78 and for men it's 76. And in fact, that dropped by 3 years for the first time ever. So it's come down to 75 now. Wow. And we can have a whole discussion on why that happened, right?
Yeah.
So now it's dropped by 3 years, which is a big red flag. So anyways, why is it in our 70s when you have the wealthiest empire that's ever existed, that spends the most on healthcare than anyone has ever spent in the history of this planet? $4.3 trillion a year.
Yeah.
It's not so much what do I add, what supplement do I take, what food do I eat. It's more about what do I remove. I already have the gift of 120. I'm wired for it. It's the things that I do that take years away.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is if I knew what my genes were telling me, I would know exactly how to make the right choice every single time. I would never make a mistake. And now imagine if you never made a mistake, and you think about like the blue zones where they have cultural habits that are aligned to their genetics. And 110, 115, 120 is normal for them.
Yeah.
Living to 90 is considered a short life in those areas. Centenarian is typical. Right? So why? They're not doing oxygen therapy and stem cells and 120 supplements a day, right?
Right.
They just have habits from their food to their lifestyle to their stress levels, all of that aligned to their human genome for that local jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So in the infinite complexity of 22,000 genes and billions of lines of code, there's this great simplicity of if I know exactly what my body wants me to do, and I do that, I will live a long, healthy life. And a
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with avoiding the things I wasn't supposed to do.
Yep. Yep. What are a couple of other really popular genes that you maybe see, 20% of the population or 30, 40% of the population has this gene and they don't even know it?
So I would say a big red flag, the area that needs the most work and support is everything around female hormone health. So if
Mm,
you look at the our medical system, the part that's the most underserved is female hormone health. Oh, menopause is supposed to be horrible. You're supposed to have PMS. For infertility is 30% of women now need IVF or some sort of fertility treatment to get pregnant. And that's just considered normal. Literally 30%, right?
wow.
That was unheard of some time ago. So what's going on is, to answer your question about the gene, there's a lot of women out there that are making far too much estrogen, and they're making a toxic metabolite out of that estrogen, and your genes will tell you this. And so the same exact exposure of the soaps you're using, the shampoos, the yoga pants, the pesticides, etc., that may be hormone mimicking and disrupting, for one woman isn't a problem, and for you is breast cancer,
Wow.
right? Or for you is infertility, or for you is Alzheimer's, or for you is ovarian cancer. So same exact input on top of a profile, one of those 6 profiles I was talking about, which is dominant and toxic in terms of estrogen, leads to crazy inflammation. And there's an estrogen metabolite called 4-hydroxyestrogen, which very specifically loves to live in breast tissue.
Mm,
And if you're making too much of this stuff and it's inflammatory, and you don't understand what your habits should be, and you don't genetically have the right detox systems in place to remove it, it's going to cause inflammation in the breast tissue, which leads to what? Things like breast
yeah.
cancer, right? So I would say that's the big aha moment that we go through with people, which is your hormones are making you sick, and you've never even understood what your hormones are doing.
Yeah. That's important. That's powerful. And yeah, so tell everyone. I'm sure by now everyone wants to know. I'm ready to go for the new test as well myself. Again, especially since you only have to do it one time and you get such incredible insights. Now, when I did get the report, I did. I don't think I would have been able to interpret it by myself, right? I'm certainly glad that I spoke with someone on your team who helped walk me through it and break it down and give me some suggestions and things like that. So yeah, can you tell people a little bit about the DNA company and then, having someone help them interpret the results?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 answers here. One is, since the time you saw it, it has been made much easier to use.
Okay.
And I remember one of our clients, during those 7,000 people that we researched, was a very high power executive here in Canada where I live. He was the chief technology officer for our biggest telecom company, right? So a multi-billion-dollar company. He ran all their tech. And so he said that, I want to give you some advice. He had autism in his family, right? And so I helped with that. He said, what you're doing here is incredible. This can change everyone's health. You need to make it easy to use. That's the only thing stopping you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we did 2 things. We made the report, as opposed to a report, which is what people think they're supposed to get. What is my results? Well, I can give you a result. You're not going to understand what it means, because
Right.
everything that everyone has been hearing me talk about today are not gene results. They're insights. They're interpretation.
Right.
Right? I am not saying this gene means this. I'm saying if you look at a whole profile, it equals this kind of problem. That's interpretation. So the reports don't speak to a gene result. They speak to anxiety, weight gain, keto diet, etc., things that you understand. The second layer is, I've understood that there's so much that we know that the FDA won't let us say, right?
Mm,
And so we have programs that allow us to go back and forth with people. And I actually run them myself now. I didn't used to. And you and I were talking about this earlier. People have been asking for a long time, how do they work with me? And that was not a scalable option, meaning that, how do I even offer that? Because I'm going to get, 5, 10 people out of the thousands at the door, right? So we did since then build a group program that allows me to interpret for people and dive deep into insights that you would never figure out on your own, that is not academically known. This is our own unique data from studying those 7,000 people that we've understood. And so I've separated my own personal website to allow people to go there and sign up. So whether somebody wants a test or they want a program, I would say go to my personal website, buy the test there, and then you can talk to someone about how to get into one of these programs if you want to dive deeper. Essentially, take my data and give me a playbook of how to live to 120 with good health.
Yeah, and that's the name of your program, right? Live to 120.
Yes. Yes, that's the
it.
whole plan is let's remove every obstacle. Let's give you this GPS that looks out in the future, finds every obstacle, gives you some level of detour. Let's avoid that problem and tells you today how to have the best energy, best libido, best hair, best skin. Later, how to have good longitudinal health without any of these chronic diseases that you see so much of. And ultimately, that learning then applies to your family. You've understood your body, which means you probably now understand your kids also. So you can extend that into them, right? So, yeah, so I would say I'll share a link with you guys on how to go to my personal site. And then anyone that gets tested through there can enter any of my programs that they want.
Great. Yeah. And what is the, why don't you just spell it out for people who may be listening right now and may not want to run and check the show notes after? What's your website?
Sure. It's kashkhanofficial.com. So KASHKHAN official.com. I would also suggest that's my Instagram account. So I would suggest go to my Instagram account and you can communicate with me there if you'd like. You'll find that there's a ton of information on my Instagram account about everything we've been talking about here today. And so even just for the sake of education, just go there and learn. If you like what we talked about here today, it's going to blow your mind what's there.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. I should have revisited this sooner. So I'm glad we had this conversation, and I'm revisiting it now. Let me ask you one last question. Living to 120, there are certain people that think we could live longer. You mentioned telomeres, and I know there's some age tests that look at the length of your telomeres, and now other longevity things are trying to extend the length of your telomeres or the length of your life. We have CRISPR technology, right? Gene editing technology that maybe one day using your DNA tests, we will be able to say, oh, we're missing this gene. Well, let's just go insert that gene, right? What do you think about all that?
So everything you just said is true. And all of that is coming much sooner than people think. So you're exactly right. We know what to target. There's other companies that know how to target. And those two things are coming together very soon. And in fact, I'm working on research projects right now for gene therapies, which is instead of telling you that you have the Alzheimer's gene, why don't I edit that gene so that it's not even a concern? Right now, we have to deal with the gut, we have to deal with, but that's coming, right? And so if you can stick around for 3 to 5 years and just keep the maintenance going, you're going to see magic happening. To your point, 120 is a reasonable expectation if you do everything right. Now, if you get into biohacking territory, that's life extension, right? And I think the biohacking community has something wrong where they're trying to use biohacking now to get to 120 or 130 or 150. Where the simplicity of getting there is a lot easier than people think. All of what you're doing should be, let me get the terrain into its best state. Let me do everything I need to do to be optimal today. Then I start the biohacks and the longevity and the life extension stuff, which will get me to 150, 160 potentially, right? But 120 shouldn't be a challenge. Let's just say that.
This is amazing. I'm so excited. I got a big smile on my face. I am so excited about what you're working on and the future of this and what this holds. And we can literally say, hey, you're missing this gene. Okay, next day you go. Now you got the gene. It's just fascinating and incredible. For now, let's learn what our genes are, learn how to best utilize it. Your genes are not your destiny, as we said earlier. You can use the information to really shape the way your genes express or don't express themselves and improve your life. So, Kashif, thank you so much for joining us here today. This was absolutely incredible. I highly recommend everyone go to his site and check it out. Any last words?
No, I mean, in all, from what everybody heard here today, I hope you've understood that chronic disease and the pace at which you age is really a choice. It's not what we think it is, that the average American gets their first disease by 55, second by 65. in the last 15 years is spent in treatment, which is actually the accurate number today. That is from a healthcare system that is symptom masking and not root cause healing. So just know that if you knew how to always make the right choice, chronic disease itself is a choice. You have to cause it. You weren't born with dementia. You weren't born with plaque in your arteries, right? That was caused. Now the reason and the cause isn't the same for everybody. Knowing your biology will tell you exactly how to prevent, and it does truly become a choice.
Amazing. Absolutely love it. I'm so happy with all the work that you're doing. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And I hope to have you back on again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to see you again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.